You will probably want to use up your Raikou, Entei, and Suicune legendary incenses before the start of this event. This is part 2 of the legendary event information video detailing all the things we now know because of the Datamine since the update. For the event starting on the 8th of September, the Raikou, Entei, and Suicune research. Welcome back to another Pokemon Sleep video, it's Bro Vinny here. If you haven't seen my first video about this event, I highly recommend it. However, we are covering different topics today. We are talking about the event bundles, the missions, and the exchange shop. And also whether it is still recommended to do expert mode based on the available information. First, let's take a look at the legendary research bundles. Just like previous legendary events, in these bundles you'll be able to get Pokemon materials similar to Pokemon mains. There'll be a small, medium, and large in the first week of the event for these bundles, and then there will be a last chance bundle with small, medium, and large as well. This is my value analysis of all 6 different types of bundles. They're all quite decent in value, ranging from 34 to 45% discount. But the one that stands out the most is the one that contains the Good Camp ticket. If you don't have one, Good Camp ticket is a very valuable item. And at 42% discount, Bundle M of week 1 makes a lot of sense, especially if you want to run it straight away. The small bundles are also quite good value if what you're looking for is just a little bit more Pokemon materials to complete your exchange shop, which we'll cover in a moment. If by the end of the event you're only off from say a main skill seed by say 30 Pokemon materials, it would make a lot of sense to just buy a bundle S just to cover the missing materials so that you can exchange for one of these main skill seeds. Again, we'll come back to this in a moment. There are limits to how many of these bundles that you can get, but if you were a mega whale and you could buy every single bundle, it will cost you about 9,900 diamonds. And in total, you'll be looking at 1,250 Pokemon materials that you can get just by buying the bundles. For this event, there will be 2 weeks of missions. Week 1 missions will actually last 2 weeks, so that means if you don't complete all of week 1's missions in that first week, you can actually complete them in the second week. With week 2 missions, you will only have the remaining 7 days to actually complete it, so do try to complete all the week 2 missions within the 7 days. Week 1 missions, you'll want to reach Ultra 4 rank no matter which area you choose to be. Give out 15 biscuits, but again that can be spread over 2 weeks. Use 7 incenses and stick to your bedtime 3 times. For week 2 missions, you'll want to get Snorlax up to Master 5, which can be a bit more difficult if you're heading to Greengrass Expert. You'll want to use 100 candies, stick to your bedtime 3 times again, and cook 12 times in order to get all of the Pokemon materials. Now, if you're worried about reaching Master 5 in week 2, thankfully you'll actually get some help because in week 2, Snorlax will begin at a higher Snorlax strength, just like all of the other legendary events that we've had. In fact, if you were at Greengrass, you'd already be at Master 4. But if you're at Greengrass Expert, you'd be starting at Great 1. But if you're heading to Greengrass Expert to reach Master 5, you're going to need 3 million Snorlax strength, which is going to be difficult, especially for beginners. And for week 2, unlike week 1, you don't have the ability to prepare ahead of time before the start of the event. What is also concerning is that even at Master 5, you still haven't unlocked 2-star Raikou, Entei, or Suicune, meaning that all the incenses that you'll be using throughout the entire 2 weeks if you're below Master 5 are going to be 1-star Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, although I cannot verify that just yet. The one time I did use an Entei incense before this event, I only got 1 star. So I've got a very small sample size to show that while 2 and 3 stars aren't really going to be obtainable in expert mode. unless you can start going past these numbers. Regardless, if you can complete all of the missions, you'll be able to get 470 Pokemon materials. Now, I've also estimated how much you can get in terms of Pokemon materials based on the closeness level of your friends. Assuming that everyone is at closeness 5, you would get approximately 420 Pokemon materials from the 2 weeks of this event, based on numbers we saw for the Suicune event. If you only just started the game and have 50 closeness 0 friends, then you're expecting about 84. If you have a child account, the developers will simply give you 70 mains for free each week, 140 in total. Now, in terms of the Pokemon materials that you can get compared to previous events, we're looking at largely the same numbers, with the exception that Cresselia event had a separate section where we could get these global drowsy power, event drowsy power rewards, which would give us an extra 340 Cresselia down. But in fact, in terms of the event exchange shop, this is the best we've ever had it, and that's because if you remember from previous events, you can get Raikou or Entei or Suicune incenses at different prices. This was for the Suicune event. You can get a Suicune incense for 80 mains or 160. Of course, you would get the one that's cheaper, but there's a limit of 2, and if you want additional ones, then you'll have to pay the premium cost. In week 2, you can get an additional one for 70 Suicune mains. So there were a total of 3 Suicune incenses that you can get for cheap, and 7 Suicune incenses that you could get at a higher price. The thing about this coming legendary event is that you can do that once again, but for all 3 legendary incenses. In other words, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune will all be available at the cheaper cost, with a limit of 2 at 80 Pokemon materials per incense. That means if it doesn't matter to you which incense to get, then you can buy 6 of them at a cheap price, and if you wait until the second week, you can get 3 more of them at a cheap price. A total of 9 Pokemon incenses, legendary ones, that you can exchange at a cheaper cost. And then only if you really want to continue exchanging for the legendary incenses, you would go for the more expensive versions. We do get a lower limit than before for the more expensive version, but because there are 3 different Pokemon, it's actually a total of 15 because it's 5 times 3. Whereas previously you could get 7, but it was only for the 1 legendary. That means if you were theoretically going to exchange for every single legendary incense, there are actually 24 of them that you can exchange, 15 plus 9. So while we're not earning a lot more Pokemon materials compared to before, if we are only looking at the missions and the bundles, and in fact we're earning less because there's no ranked rewards, we are actually spending a lot less because there are a lot more cheaper incenses to exchange. What didn't increase though is the number of biscuits for the event, so the legendary biscuits or the premier biscuits. The limit is still 2 and 10 in the first week, 10 being the one that's more expensive, and then 2 more in the second week, again at a lower cost. A total of 14 premier biscuits, which is exactly the same as previous events. So while you can probably get more incenses, you'll have to spend your premier biscuits more wisely. But of course, if you do run out of these premier biscuits, don't forget there's always master biscuits that hopefully you've been saving up for. Now, the reason why I said at the start of the video you probably want to use up your legendary incenses before walking into this event is because if you're holding onto your 3 legendary incenses, say Suicune, Raikou, and Entei, from the last 3 events of these Pokemon, when this event starts and you start having to use these incenses, well, you can't even exchange just yet. You have to start using up the ones that you have on hand. Meaning that if you were planning to exchange 14 of these legendary incenses plus 3 more to hold for after the event, in other words 17, well, if you walk into this event with 3 already on hand, you'll only be able to exchange 14 of them, as opposed to 17. Why 14? Well, as I mentioned in my first video, I do recommend 1 session a day for these events. So at most, you'd only be able to use 14 incenses. There are some exceptions where running 2 sessions actually do make sense, but those players, you guys know who you are, so I don't need to cover those scenarios for you. For those playstyles, you typically have a very long first session and then a fairly short second session. As for my recommendation on what is priority for exchanging your materials, without a doubt the highest priority is the legendary incense, because that's what this event is all about. In fact, if you exchange for one of these and actually use it, you'll get Pokemon materials back, because legendaries actually drop a lot of Pokemon materials as well. So while you're spending that amount, you're actually getting some back. But don't forget to bring Premier Biscuits with you, so don't go into one of these sessions without a Premier Biscuit, in case, well, it's hungry, or at least you have a Master Biscuit with you. Do try to run the legendary incense from the first day of the event though, because there are only 14 days and you'll want to use as many of these incenses as possible. To maximize the value of your Premier Biscuit, to maximize your chance of getting a shiny one if it's in expert mode, and also running these legendary incenses after the event isn't going to give you these Pokemon materials in return. So the best time to use it is still typically within the event itself. The other high priority items are also the week 2 biscuits and incenses. Of course, you will run out of your cheap Premier Biscuit at some point, and that's when you start exchanging for the more expensive Premier Biscuit. Now, the reason why that's in yellow is because it's more expensive, relatively speaking, it's not as good value. Compared to an exchange shop, which is equivalent to around 2 Great Biscuits, because 1 Premier Biscuit is 6 points, 2 Great Biscuits is 800 sleep points, whereas 1 Premier Biscuit is approximately equal to 750. So I highlight the value in yellow to be approximately the same as what it would cost in the premium exchange. Anything in green is that it's cheaper than what it would cost in the premium exchange. Anything in red is when it's more expensive than the premier exchange. Having said that, just because it's red doesn't mean it's bad, because as you know, main skill seed is very limited and otherwise very expensive to buy from any other shop. So besides the Premier Exchange, you will probably want to get the main skill seed from this legendary shop anyway, even though it's red, which is why it is red but a high priority item. You don't need to buy this straight away, but you do need to make sure you save 350 mains by the end of the event, if you're exchanging for it at the end. In terms of Thunderstone, Firestone, and Waterstone that are also available from this event, they're actually really good value, but they aren't a high priority unless you actually need to use them for this event to evolve something that will help you during this event. So if you need it, just get it early, use it so that it powers up your team for this event. If you don't need to use any of these, then wait until towards the end of the event, and if you've got some spare materials, then by all means exchange for these. They're quite good value. In terms of candies and Dream Cluster, that's a personal opinion of which one is worth getting. Dream Clusters are better value than Handy Candy, but if you're not in dire need of Dream Shards, well then maybe Handy Candy is your preferred exchange. Although do note that the actual Raikou Entei Suicune candies, you can get up to 50 of each at a cost of 2 materials per candy, is a better value than Handy Candy. Simply because, well, Handy Candy, if you were to use it on a Raikou Entei or Suicune, would only give you 3 candies per candy, but cost you 12 materials, which is double what it would cost if you were to just exchange for it directly. So this Raikou Suicune candy option is actually relatively cheaper. And before you go and exchange for the Handy Candy S, don't forget that week 2 has a cheaper version anyway, so there's just no rush to get Handy Candy. But no matter what you do, just don't bother with the expensive Raikou Entei Suicune candy, because well, that's just expensive, and it's just there for you to use up any remaining materials that you may not have used up during the weeks. Although it's unlikely that anybody will have any remaining materials, because let's tally up all the numbers and see how much total Pokemon materials you would need to clear the entire shop. Assuming that you can actually clear all 999 Raikou, Entei, and Suicune candies and everything else in the shop, it would take almost 24,000 Pokemon materials, which is impossible to get from this event. So again, the 999 is not there for you to clear. If we take out the 999 candies from the equation, so that's about 3,000 candies taken out of the equation, to clear the rest of the shop, you'll still need about 6,000 Pokemon materials. As we were saying earlier, if you purchased every single bundle and all the missions and have maximum closeness friends, in total you're still looking at only about 2,000 Pokemon materials, which is still not enough to clear this number. Of course, you can get Pokemon materials from sleep sessions, but even if you were to get the maximum number of materials per session over 14 days, you would not come close to beating this number. So if we were to focus on incenses and biscuits only and nothing else, which I don't recommend, I do recommend that you look at main skill seeds at least, you will still need about 4,500 Pokemon materials. But as I said earlier, you probably can't exchange for all of the Pokemon incenses anyway, because there are 24 of them and you only need 17 in total. You can't hold more than 3 by the end of the event anyway. So let's say if we were to only get the cheap incenses and all of the biscuits, then you're looking at about 2,100, which is a much easier number to achieve. In fact, if you buy all the bundles and do all the missions and check your community research every day, you're already almost there, making this the best exchange shop we've ever had because of all these cheap incenses. Regardless, you'll still want to maximize your drowsy power for this event from the start of each week, because you'll want to maximize your sleep session Pokemon materials, so that you can start to clear some of the rest of the shop as much as you can. Which brings me to the last part of this video, which is how much Pokemon materials are you expected to earn from sleep session? Now, this is a very difficult question to answer for expert mode, because to this day, and I've spoken to RainNX about this, we still don't know the exact mechanism of how spawns are decided in expert mode. But let's do the best analysis we possibly can without full knowledge of how it works. Let's take a look at the raw numbers for normal mode versus expert mode. These are Pokemon materials that each Pokemon would drop at their 1-star sleep style. This is at Greengrass Isle or any isle that isn't expert mode. Pay attention to the numbers here because it's not going to change for expert mode. I'm going to select expert mode now and you'll see that none of these numbers actually change, which would be disappointing because expert mode is supposed to give you more materials, but it does. It's just not in 1-star sleep style. You have to go up to 2-star sleep style before you start to see these increases. So let's take a look at Greengrass Isle again. Suicune 2-star would drop 33 materials, Blastoise would drop 11. But at Greengrass Expert, their 2-star sleep styles drop 34 and 12, and you'll notice the trend is that they all increased by 1 material per spawn. And you guessed it, if you go to 3-star sleep style, you will see that the numbers do go up once again. So with 3-star Suicune, 36 materials at Greengrass Expert, you would get 38. And yes, for everything else, it's a +2 increase in materials. For 4-star, it actually doesn't go up anymore. It's still a +2. So 4-star Blastoise gives you 15 at Greengrass, and 4-star Blastoise at Greengrass Expert gives you 17. So assuming that you have the exact same 8 spawns between Greengrass and Greengrass Expert, we're ignoring incenses and good camp ticket for now, then you can get a maximum of 16 more materials from expert mode. Unfortunately, the problem is expert mode, it's harder to get the same sleep style. It takes more drowsy power, which is where it gets real difficult to decide, is it better for materials to go to expert mode? Of course, there are a whole heap of other benefits of doing expert mode for this legendary event I covered in the last video, but the problem remains, we just don't know, is it better for materials to go to expert mode even though you get more for the same sleep style? All those sleep styles take more drowsy power to obtain because there is no formula right now to let us know how the spawns occur. And I will stress that this simulation can be extremely inaccurate for expert mode, so take this with a grain of salt, and I've spoken to Rain and X about this. Just don't trust the results for expert mode. For everything else, it should be okay. What I've done is I've set the Snorlax strength to go from 0 all the way up to 11 million. And you can see that no matter which area, the amount of materials you get will start to plateau after some time. But you guessed it, the one that plateaus at the highest is at expert mode, which no doubt makes the most sense, because if you had an extreme amount of drowsy power, you go for master 20 at expert mode on day 1, well, of course expert mode will give you the most materials because you can already achieve every single high sleep style, and each one gives you +2 more material than a standard mode. So of course the plateau, the amount of materials you get, will be higher for expert mode. We can see at the bottom of this list on the right column, the plateau is 87 materials for 8 spawns, so you can get more if you're running Pokemon incenses, in other words legendary incenses and good chem tickets throughout every day of the weeks. Whereas the Old Gold Power Plant is about 10 less, and at regular green grass it's a little bit less still. So almost without a doubt, the limit, or rather the cap, of how much material you can obtain will be the best at green grass expert. The real question is at the earliest stages of your Snorlax strength. And if you don't have very powerful teams and you're stuck at, say, even before 2 million Snorlax strength, and hopefully we can all go beyond this, but let's say we're just not doing that well, then it may be true that expert mode is not for you. In fact, you'll get less materials than the other areas. So do try your best to push as far as you can, because the good numbers come later in the week. If you've been doing your overstacking and your meal preparation ahead of time, I think most of us should be fine for week 1. With week 2, we do get that initial Snorlax power boost. But if you feel like even in week 1 you didn't do that well despite all the preparation, maybe for week 2 you might want to drop expert mode. So I would recommend that you use week 1 as a gauge and check out the number of materials that your friends are getting in other areas if they aren't doing expert mode, just to see if it's worth you to keep going with expert mode in week 2. Because of course expert mode players are also fighting a low expert bonus to start this event with compared to other area bonuses. And lastly, according to the Datamine from Rain and X, it does look like you can use those legendary incenses for Raikou, Entei and Suicune outside of their normal habitats within the event areas. So as you can see, Raikou can be used at Cyan Beach and Taupe Hollow, Entei can be used at Cyan Beach and Old Gold Power Plant, Suicune can be used in Taupe Hollow and Power Plant during the 2 weeks of this event. I hope this video has helped you guys decide where to go for this event, and remember to use your legendary incenses before starting this event. Thank you for watching guys, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe and let me know which area you're heading to for this event.